Good morning,
different
everyone. Thank you
destination
so much
airports around the world. Do I have that right?
for your patience.
Amazing.
We're going to ask
So
folks
let's
to
do a
please
hot switch
mute
if you don't.
themselves if you are not speaking. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we'll get started in less than 60 seconds when we're respectful of everyone's time. I'm going to put my phone on Do Not Disturb as well. And we're just so grateful for everyone joining us very last minute on what is breaking news this morning. And so let me make sure everyone who's waiting is logged in. We will do questions following brief remarks from myself and the Sloth Institute and the Sloth Conservation Foundation. But if you have questions ongoing, you're welcome to type them in the chat. I will watch the chat as well, but we will create space for questions following initial reactions. And so let's go ahead and get started. We are recording this and we'll share the recording with all of our press partners so that you have that link as well. So good morning. My name is Representative Dr. Anna V. Eskamani. I am currently joining you from my state capitol office in Tallahassee. And I'm just really thrilled to share news from this morning that the Florida Wildlife Conservation Commission is working on an executive order from the agency to establish a temporary pause on all sloth importations into the state of Florida. I cannot overstate the importance of this decision and what it means for the health and well-being of sensitive species like sloths in Florida, but also around the country. We know that the bulk of importations of so-called pet sloths and sloths for commercial use comes through the Port of Miami. And so having this type of decision is a game changer. And of course, it gives us the time to pursue long-term policy change. Myself, Sam Trull with the Sloth Institute, and Dr. Rebecca Cliffe with the Sloth Conservation Foundation, we met with FWC this Monday, and we met with their chief of staff, we met with their chief investigators, and not only do we, of course, share our concerns with the lack of any criminal violations as it pertains to the now bankrupt so-called sloth world, but we also spent part of that conversation talking about our policy recommendations when it comes to the health and well-being of sloths. And in that conversation, we talked about our desire to end the commercial ownership of these animals, to ensure that there are experts who take care of them, not just class 3 permit holders, which are not required to have any type of background in sloth biology. And also the concern that even FWC inspectors are not veterinarians, they're law enforcement officers. So their ability to really understand the status of every animal, especially those under a class 3 permit, is just not realistic. And there needs to be a reform of that approach. So with those opening remarks provided, I'm going to now introduce Sam Trull, the Sloth Institute. Sam is actually on a plane right now, so I'm sure her comments will be short, but she did not want to miss this historic moment. And so, Sam, I'll toss it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry. Again, I'm on a plane and I think they're actually making an announcement right now. We just boarded. But like Dr. Eskamani said, I am just so excited. I honestly am trying not to cry because I'm really happy that, change is actually being made. I know it's a temporary order, but it's such a huge step. And I think it shows that they recognize that it's needed and that was a big problem. As was already stated, 98% of all imports of sloths come through Miami, come through Florida. This is not only a huge step for Florida, it's a huge step for all of the United States. It's a huge step for sloths all over the world because they're coming from other countries. And I'm just really excited that, again, people care and they want to help, and that everyone's rallied together to try to solve this problem, and that everyone's taking it seriously. And I really can't thank, my colleagues here, Representative Eskamani, Dr. Cliffe, and of course you guys, the press, for getting the message out, and the public for really stepping up and speaking out, because your voice matters. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Dr. Cliffe.
Good morning. There's not so much more that I can add, I don't think, but from our side, I'm here in Costa Rica and it is such a massive deal. We are so overwhelmed and excited. It was the best news to wake up to that I think I've ever had. And I know it seems like, okay, it's a temporary ban just in Florida. And I've mentioned that, in our previous press conference that we're not going to stop until the importation of sloths is permanently banned on a federal level coming into the United States. So that is the ultimate goal. But the fact that we're getting to this first milestone so quickly, and right after our meeting with the FWC on Monday, really shows us that they're taking it seriously, and this is being handled as an urgent matter on all levels, and that fills us with so much hope and energy to keep on fighting. Because, those sloths need justice, and we're not going to stop until we get it at the highest level. But yeah, this is just another win, and it's thanks to all of you guys, and yeah, thanks to Representative Eskamani and Sam at the Sloth Institute and everyone who's helped us get to this point. It is the best news, and I just can't wait to see what comes next now.
Thanks so much, Dr. Cliffe, and to Sam. Your advocacy and coming to Orlando from Costa Rica, without a doubt, made a huge, huge difference. Your expertise is essential in our advocacy. And so I really thank both of you for your leadership every single day, but also just being some of the first voices to uplift concerns about the now bankrupt sloth world, because we really have to make sure the public understands how sensitive these animals are, but also how inappropriate it is that they are commercialized for human entertainment. And I'm going to open up for questions. So if you do have a question, you're welcome to raise your digital hand or raise your physical hand. I saw one question in the chat that I'll answer proactively because I'm sure it's a question that many folks have. What does temporary mean? When is it coming? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so upon hearing this news, I believe I first read it with Channel 9, but hearing the news in the public, having it be shared with me from other media outlets, I immediately contacted FWC to just get a direct confirmation from the agency myself. And I spoke to their legislative liaison about this. And there actually is an FWC meeting of the commission right now in Fort Myers. Now, this announcement I don't believe was made at the meeting, unless I missed it, but confirmation from the legislative liaison shared with me that this pause is coming from the director. It will be a 60-day pause. And of course, I also asked the question about enforcement. What does enforcement look like? And the legislative liaison didn't have an answer for me with more details, but will follow up with me and also ensure that she will share with me the executive order as it's prepared. But she did speak to how there'd have to be coordination with ports of entry, including the Port of Miami, including airports. And so obviously there's still a lot of questions and details to be answered. And none of this addresses the fact that there were no criminal charges at this time for Sloth World. And so I want to be clear that the criminal probe continues. In these last 7 days, both Dr. Cliffe and Sam already met with both State Attorney Monique Worrell's office and the Office of Statewide Prosecution under the Attorney General's office. They've met with Republican and Democratic lawmakers at the state and federal level, most recently working to schedule a meeting with the Office of U.S. Senator Rick Scott. And so there are ongoing conversations when it comes to that long-term policy change at the federal and state level. But obviously, Florida making this decision will send a ripple effect across the country. And we're hopeful that the pause will also give us the opportunity to craft really intentional rulemaking changes. So as a reminder to my friends in the media, yes, legislative change is on the table, but rulemaking through the agency will be a lot faster. And there are at least 2 more FWC commission meetings in August and December. So our goal is to prep for those meetings to craft well-vetted, thoughtful policy that the public can engage with and that the commission would vote to approve. And so that's kind of another synopsis of additional work, additional timelines as well. And Kylie asked in the chat, will FWC be making a formal announcement about this today? If so, what time? I am not aware of a formal announcement. They are meeting in Fort Myers. I think that would be the most appropriate place to make it. So if you do have press partners in Fort Myers, in that area, you might be willing to have them ask the commissioners at some point today. And so I don't know, Kylie, do you have another question you want to uplift? You're welcome to.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for giving this and answering my question here. I'll turn on video. Um, there we are. Yeah, so how, just kind of looking, I know there's still some questions to be answered here, but you had mentioned some coordination with other agencies. What do you imagine like will be necessary? Like what types of agencies will they need to work with at these import like areas?
Yeah.
I know FWC doesn't necessarily like manage all of the imports coming in.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is going to have to be a partnership with state, local, and federal officials. Any type of obviously customs and border security is going to have to be key here. I would also hope that there would be an effort to ensure that there's no type of transportation of slots from other states into Florida. Now, with that said, 98%, this is based on data from the Sloth Institute, 98% of sloth imports are coming from the Port of Miami. So candidly, if you put the focus on the Port of Miami, you will be in a good posture to prevent this from happening. But whenever you block one passage, others are created. And so it's very important that there be criminal penalties associated with importation so that it deters someone from engaging in that behavior. But of course, that we're also being realistic to the fact that this is an international issue. And so we have to work with all of our law enforcement officials that operate when it comes to importations of all items, all products. We've already heard horror stories from across the world when it comes to sick sloths being brought into ports of entry. I know Sam and Dr. Cliffe can speak to this more eloquently than I, so I'll toss over to them. But it is going to have to be a multi-layered partnership to ensure that it's effective. Dr. Cliffe, do you want to add more to that? I see you're unmuted.
Sorry, I've been unmuted the whole time, I think. um, yeah, and on that, I mean, like you said, I now expect that if we're closing down the port of Miami for sloth imports, at least temporarily, they're probably going to come in elsewhere. These people are pretty relentless when it comes to getting the sloths. So that's why we're going to work on a federal level as well, which, as you know, we're making very good progress on. And, we're also working on levels like with the USDA to try and end things like, sloth encounters, because there are a lot of sloths already in Florida that are being put through situations that are not good for them. People being allowed to pet them and hold them. And so we're also working with the USDA on rule changes for that as well. I mean, I'm sure many of you probably saw in the news this week that there was like a young child got bit in the face by a sloth during a sloth encounter. So it's all of these things that are just really coming to light now, now that we're shining a spotlight on it. And yeah, I'm feeling really positive about the change.
Awesome. Sam, I know you're about to be in air. Did you want to add anything to that or no pressure? Just want to make sure.
No, I mean, I think Becky covered it all. Like she mentioned, sloths can also be dangerous to humans. And so I think the more that we dig, we're just going to find more reasons why this isn't a good business model to bring sloths from the wild into the US for people to, play with, basically. It's just not good for anyone.
Absolutely. Kay Mason, you're next, and Valerie, you'll be right after.
Okay, awesome. So based on your conversations with FWC on Monday, what does it take to make a permanent ban?
Excellent question. Basically, it would be rulemaking. Now, for something to be even more concrete, I would recommend legislative change. So remember the process, right? When the legislature works on bills that are sent to the governor that become law, but once the law is official in Florida statute, the next step is rulemaking. How do you enforce that law? And the reason why a law would be more permanent is that it requires a checks and balances to change, right? It requires a legislative body, 120 House members, 40 state senators to pursue any type of repeal or so forth. Rulemaking is under the agency, which is why it's just more expedient to do rulemaking. And I do think sometimes, depending on the policy topic, there's a preference to pursue rulemaking than legislative change, especially when you get really into the weeds on different policy matters. And there are thousands of Class 3 permit users in the state of Florida. And so to pass laws on each one of them might be a little tedious for the agency itself. But with that said, rulemaking gets us a change before the year is over, because we're not back in Tallahassee for a regular session until March of 2027. And so for us to accomplish an immediate change, rulemaking is our best option. And the FWC director does have the power to pursue emergency executive orders, which is what he will do in the context of sloth importations at this time. But we want to see more changes. We're pursuing sensitive species class. It's unbelievable to all of us that a Class 3 permit is appropriate for an animal as sensitive as sloths. Class 3 permits are designed for squirrels, raccoons, skunks, animals that are not historically sensitive, and they're also defined by their risk to the human, not the risk of the human to the animal. And so we want to be really mindful when we approach any type of permit changes, because obviously it impacts thousands of people across the state of Florida, but ultimately our commitment is to the health and well-being of animals. And it's clear to me, based on our meeting with FWC, that FWC is not equipped to really provide oversight over sloths. I mean, candidly, when we met with their investigators, these are law enforcement officers. They're looking at the measurements of an enclosure. They're looking at if there is an enclosure. In some cases, they're not. They're looking at if there's water in the bowl and food in the bowl. They don't have the ability to do any type of science or medical check. They're literally looking at these kind of legal requirements in the context of enclosures, and that's it. And so we do need some serious policy change. Valerie?
Hello there. So the other day when I talked to you, you mentioned possible task force, and then the release came out saying task force was created at FWC, but then our people reached out to FWC and they didn't know anything about the task force. Can you please clarify that?
Yeah, a task force is being created, but not one has been created yet. And so when we met with FWC on Monday, they told us that they're having internal conversations about creating a task force. And we asked if both Sam and Dr. Cliffe could serve on it as outside voices, just because of their expertise when sloth conservation and sloth science, waiting that response. So no task force has been formed, is my understanding, but they basically made that commitment to us that they've been discussing it and wish to do it. And that would be the body that evaluates rulemaking changes. It's not unusual for FWC to create task force. They have a task force internally regarding issues pertaining to exotic birds, such as swans. So there's been a lot of efforts within FWC to evaluate a lot of different rules and permit issues. And so we are waiting for more updates ourselves and very hopeful that these two women in particular will get to serve in that capacity or at least be seen as essential advisors. When we met with FWC, they referred to it as like industry leaders to serve on a task force. And I asked, what does that mean? And because I want to make sure that it's not commercial voices that are overpowering the conversation, but that it's conservation and scientists.
I will
So
just
it sounds like maybe they're using different terminology. Sorry.
Go ahead, Dr. Cliffe.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I'll just add in quickly that, yeah, one thing that's become very apparent throughout this whole case is that there is a massive lack of sloth expertise in Florida and in the United States, and people, I think, underestimated just how much specialized care and knowledge it takes to really understand them and know when they're suffering and really interpret these situations. Even from the necropsy reports, we're seeing some massive errors in those necropsy reports that are being made because they're comparing sloths to the typical animals they might do a necropsy on, and they're a completely different animal. So I think there's been a big realization across many levels that sloths actually, we can't treat them like any other animal, and that people, maybe the vets there and things, that they're just not equipped to with the knowledge at this time, and the FWC inspectors and things to be able to make decisions on what is best for those animals, which is, really insightful.
And do you still want a special classification just for the sloths, or would you like to see all really sensitive exotic animals get a special classification?
The goal is to get a sensitive species act. So to try and get something which, because obviously the sloths are our priority, and if we can get anything that in place that'll protect sloths, we'll be happy. But it's not just sloths. Like, this is happening across the board with so many different sensitive animals that need this same level of care. So if we can get something in place that also protects other species, and I know there's a lot of concerns around, you know, enforcement on that, and how we're going to define a sensitive species, because every conservation activist or organization is going to be like, my species is sensitive, and try and put it on there. So it's got to be really scientifically justifiable, right? And I think that's very important. But it's something that we're working towards.
Okay, thanks. And Anna, just to go back to the task force, do you think FWC is just calling it something different than a task force? Is that where there's some confusion?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, based on our conversation on Monday of this week, they told us the task force will be formed, but nothing has been formed. And so, that's all that I can speak to. And I will say too, to Dr. Cliffe's point, obviously we want all animals to be safe, and we want to improve and strengthen those welfare policies. I do think that for the immediate, being able to have a success with sloths will open up the door and conversations for other sensitive species. But that's why we want to really do this right. And so one point that FWC made to us is that the August commission meeting may be too tight of a timeline, and we may be looking at December. And so we're going to work fast to put together recommended policy for the August meeting. But remember, any type of rulemaking suggestion has to go through public comment as well. And so we want to really do this right, do this well. So I like to think of an August timeline. December might be more realistic.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we had Marie next, and then Michael.
Hello. Today, the FWC Executive Director, Roger Young, said he's contacted, or his captive wildlife specialists have contacted all other Class 3 facilities throughout Florida that house sloths to assess the animal's health and found no significant issues. Dr. Cliffe and Sam, I know, also has talked before, and even just a few moments ago, about some of these facilities that exist that allow for the petting and holding of sloths. So it seems like you guys have different views of what you'd consider to be significant issues. I was wondering if you could talk about that and just give me your take on the idea that they've contacted every single facility and found everything's fine.
Yeah, more of the same, unfortunately. Sam, I'll toss it to you.
Oh, yeah. Just real quick, because the plane's starting to move. But I would just like to reiterate what Dr. Cliffe already mentioned, that there aren't really any sloth experts in the FWC currently, and assessing whether they're stressed or have a proper diet is just not something they're able to do without the proper training. So it's nothing against them personally, like maybe it would look fine for a dog or a cat, but sloths are extremely different. Millions and millions and millions of years of evolution different. So it's just not comparable.
Thank you. Dr. Cliffe?
Yeah, just as Sam said, I mean, there is nobody with, as that we found so far, with the qualifications to properly interpret what would constitute a stressed sloth. It takes. I've worked with them for 17 years and Sam for 13 years, and we're still learning a lot about this. And now we can confidently look at a sloth and the conditions it's in and say whether it's appropriate or not. But very few people in the United States have that kind of experience. So. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of perhaps training we need to do with the FWC also. And again, working with the USDA about what is and isn't okay for a sloth, because we know that. And I think at the moment there's a very, very, very little oversight from them on what on how sloths are treated when they're in these exhibitions and these facilities. People being allowed to pay to hold them, children being allowed to hold them. These are wild animals with very big teeth. They are not domesticated. And the fact that sloth bit the child it shows that it was scared and it was afraid, because sloths only bite when they're really scared. So, yeah, there's just a lot of work to do still on this, but we're making good progress.
Thank you, Dr. Cliffe. And I'll just add too, I'm glad that FWC made that effort to check those facilities. That was a question we actually asked them during our meeting, was how many permit holders are there for sloths in Florida? These are we made a public request formally, so there's a lot of more data that we're seeking to better understand this landscape. But again, they also admitted to us that we are law enforcement officers. We are not veterinarians. We're not scientists. And so what they're looking for is the same exact thing they're looking for in Sloth World. And they also said everything seemed fine. And so that they're using the same standard they used before. And that's the problem. There needs to be a different standard.
Yeah.
Do you have that number for how many permit holders there are?
They didn't have that offhand. And so we've made that request. So as soon as we have it, we'll share it with you.
And I'll just say one more thing on that. So yeah, they're looking at like things like enclosure size and whether there's, as Anna said, water in the bowl and stuff. But what a sloth needs is so different from that. People think that sloths are just, sleepy, slow, very simple creatures that don't need very much. Maybe they need a platform and a rope and some plastic leaves. But that's not true. Sloths are much more active than we think. They're much more complex. They have very specific needs, and a simple enclosure just doesn't cut it for a sloth. And I think that's something that's becoming very apparent here as well.
Thank you.
I did have one other question also asking about something Mr. Young said, which was, he says, it appears this group of sloths at Sloth World contracted an intestinal infection that resulted in severe and in many cases fatal effects. I just want to get your response to that, since we know from the FWC's own reports that at least 21 of them died allegedly from cold shock. Another 10 by August of last year had died presumably due to issues in transport, and another 20 plus have died since then. Though you've reviewed the necropsies, Dr. Cliffe. So I'm hoping to get your take on that. And then also, just while I'm already talking to Dr. Cliffe, you'd also said you'd found some errors in the necropsies that I'd like you to talk about in more detail if you can.
Sam, are you still there? No, we've lost it.
Actually, kind of, yes, sorry.
Sam, you might want to jump in on that first, because I know you have a lot of info.
Yeah. So with the necropsies, we definitely found that it was more, diet related issues. That's what caused the intestinal issues. And also, there was trauma on the spinal cords, and they've also been found to be very emaciated. So I think that, talking about a virus or some kind of disease that couldn't be prevented is just not actually substantiated by the necropsies. It's really sounds like more of an excuse, as there, wasn't anything that could have been done differently. But in reality, a lot could have been done differently, and they, could have been a different outcome. Okay, we actually are about to take off. I'll see y'all later.
Bye, Sam. Yeah, so there's a lot of things. So just firstly with the necropsies, so there was a lot of things where they'd compared things like levels of vitamin B12, right, to other animals, and they'd got it really wrong. So then what happened, and they'd said that they were B12 deficient, and then what's happened from that is that we know Sloth World were then giving regular injections of B12 to all the sloths, which they didn't need, because it's not accurate from what sloths actually should normally have. They're just completely different animals. And I've forgotten what the other questions were. I've got sidetracked.
It was about something the executive director said today at the meeting, which was that he says, it appears this group of sloths contracted an intestinal infection that resulted in severe, in many cases, fatal effects. And I was hoping to get your take on that, since we know that's just not true, at least in many cases.
It's an excuse. And okay, firstly, if they did contract an intestinal infection, why weren't they being quarantined? Why was an infection allowed to spread throughout the population of captive sloths that they had? So there's that. And secondly, if they did contract an intestinal infection, that is not something that happens in a normal, wild, healthy sloth. You don't get intestinal infections wiping out the sloths. It's happening because they're chronically stressed, they're being fed a bad diet, their immune systems are weakened, and everything is sort of fed into that situation. And perhaps maybe, yeah, there was an intestinal infection, right? But why was there an intestinal infection? It's like, okay, that might have been the ultimate cause of death, but what led to that? So yeah, it's just excuses, and the fact is that those sloths weren't being properly cared for.
Well said, Dr. Cliffe. And stress adds to all those factors, right? And I think it's important for viewers to understand that these were wild sloths that were happily eating leaves in a rainforest in Peru and Guyana and brought here for human entertainment. These were not sloths raised for captivity. Not to say they should be in the first place, but I mean, the context here is really, really important. And even some of the incident reports, FWC writes, as they get used to captivity. I mean, that's such a heartbreaking sentence. You know, what did these sloths do to deserve to even be held in captivity? I mean, I think there's just a larger conversation here when it comes to wild sloths coming to Florida, which is why we're grateful for this temporary pause, because it just speaks to the seriousness of this ecosystem and how the normal cannot continue. So thank you, Marie. I'm going to go to Michael, if that's okay. Okay, Michael.
Yeah, slightly pivoting, but still about sloths. What's your understanding of the current status of a criminal investigation after your meetings with representatives from the AG's office and the state attorney's office? And also, has there been any movement in getting in touch with Pete Bandry?
Ah, good questions. Okay, the meeting with the Attorney General's office and the state prosecutors was as the best we could have hoped for, right? They are taking this so seriously and they're not leaving any stones unturned. In fact, I've just got an email from them right now. And they're really diving into this. So I feel very confident that they are on a mission to catch the bad guys and to hold them accountable. So yeah, that feels really good from our side. I've actually not had a moment to properly touch base with them since getting back because it's been such a whirlwind. But yeah, it's ongoing, and you know, there's a lot of different levels to what happened here, and possible criminal actions, including we're looking into the Peruvian side to see if those sloths were actually legally captured and exported from Peru, because there seems to be some anomalies there, and there's also there's a lot of anomalies all over the place, including with the FWC reports, which are being looked into as well. So yeah, there's just a lot going on. And then your other question?
Pete Bandry. I know that the way you described it last week is like as if he vanished.
Yeah.
Has there been any progress in getting in touch with him?
No, not even a whisper, not from Ben nor Pete. Which I presume they're lawyering up and yeah, keeping their heads down. But yeah, and we've not had anything from them at all.
Thank you, Michael. Chris, I see you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Actually, I did, and I'm very sorry for being late. But
no worries.
y'all were asking us great questions that I just was along for the ride. But I was wondering, does the ban apply to the sale of sloths as pets as well?
Great question.
In Florida?
So we have not seen the language. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say there are advertisements online for people selling sloths in Florida. You can Google them. So
yeah,
that's bad.
Agree with you. Yeah, totally agree with you. So we've not seen the language yet of what the executive order will say. What FWC told me is that it is a temporary pause in importations for 60 days. So they did not mention anything regarding sales or current ownership. So it's concerning that behavior will continue. And it's more reason for us to pursue that long-term policy change. But to the heart of your question, my understanding that it is going to be a temporary pause in importations, but if you're a sloth already in Florida, that the status quo remains the same.
Although I will say we're working with the county commissioners to try, just within Orlando, to try and change some things around the sale of pet sloths. But yeah, enforcement is a problem because the sloths are being sold online. They're not being sold in they are being sold in pet stores, but most pet sloths are bought online. So there's an enforcement issue regarding the point of sale and how to tackle that. But we are in conversations about that.
And one follow-up, if I could. How do you tell a sloth, that's been born in captivity in a sloth that was stolen from the wild?
Very few are born in captivity because, so in the pet trade, the vast majority of sloths in the pet trade, and we don't have an exact percentage on this, but they are all usually taken from the wild, or their parents were taken from the wild while pregnant. So if it says it's a captive born sloth, like captive bred, it's usually because the mum was taken from the wild still pregnant. Sloths that are wild caught and brought into the country do not happily just reproduce with each other. They're chronically stressed. They're often dying, and so there is not success in captive breeding them in the country outside of AZA accredited facilities where this can happen. But again, it's very difficult, and that's why you often see zoos celebrating the birth of a baby sloth, because it's actually not that common. So yeah, and we know a lot of sloths that are sold into the pet trade and to commercial facilities as well are incorrectly labeled as being captive bred, and they're not. That's just, they're like captive bred sloth to make it seem okay, but that individual actually did come from the wild.
And that's so important for the public to understand. So thank you, Dr. Cliffe, for amplifying that. Really, any sloth being held as a pet, especially in non-accredited facilities, is a sloth that should be back in the wild, should be happily eating leaves in a rainforest. So thank you for that. I don't know if I see any other hands raised. We're also approaching that 11 a.m. mark, so we'll be sensitive to everyone's deadlines. We will provide this recording as well as soon as it's ready. But if you do have more questions, I'll be sure to share Dr. Cliffe's email in the post-gaggle just press release so you have it along with Sam's information. These are two phenomenal voices that have made themselves available to us in so many ways. So we're so grateful for that. And I just thank all of our media partners for continuing your work on this story. I know there's a lot of stories out there. Things are really heating up around us in the political world. And so I really appreciate you having a thought focus for our sloths. And we are sending as much good energy as we can to the Central Florida Zoo as they continue to take care of the 10 surviving sloths. They are in need of resources. I saw they're creating some different fundraising opportunities. And so they are requesting appropriation here in legislature just for improvements, capital improvements in general that I'm advocating for. And so please continue to uplift the Central Florida Zoo for everything that they're doing as well. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.